When would a company have a negative shareholders' equity value? This is a super common question in investment banking interviews. Let's get into it. Now, the first mistake you don't want to make in this question is confusing your equity value with your total shareholders' equity value. Equity value is a company's number of shares multiplied by its price per share. Logically, it is not allowed to be negative. Shareholders' equity is your common stock plus your retained earnings, and retained earnings can go negative, and there's two ways you can do that. The first way is through a dividend recap or a dividend recapitalization, which is a special dividend done by private equity companies on their holding company. Well, let's say it's a 10-year time period, and they want to make sure they bring their investors back some money at the fifth year. Instead of selling the business because they can't, what they'll do is do a dividend recap where they re-lever the business and they take out basically a big loan to distribute cash or dividends to their shareholders. Now, because it's usually a very large company and it can be a large amount of cash, the amount of cash can actually make your retained earnings negative, making your stockholders' equity negative. Now, usually if someone asks you this in an interview, you don't want to just explain the whole thing. You can usually just say dividend recapitalization. If they want clarification, they'll ask. Now, the other way a company's stockholders' equity can be negative is if they have continued losses over time. So when we look back at retained earnings, right, it's made up of your revenue subtract your dividends subtract your expenses. If our expenses continue to increase greater than our revenue over time, then our retained earnings is going to lose money. Now, if we do this over a certain amount of time, then our retained earnings is essentially going to go negative. And once that's greater than our shareholders' equity, our common stock, our shareholders' equity will now be negative.